Chapter 3, Grandparents, Gwen, and Me. So, hope you guys enjoyed listening to Chapter 3. We're going to discuss it, and this is where we get some real depth in the chapters. So it starts to get longer, and the world starts to really become built here. So I'm going to ask you some questions based on the reading. So let's start with this amazing line. Keep your dress tail down and your legs crossed.
Yeah.
So what was that statement about?
That was my grandfather telling my mother and his other daughters to stay away from boys, right? And that's an old Southern sort of statement, right? There was, back in the day, there was no, hey, we're going to sit you down. We're going to tell you about, sex and what to do and what not to do, right? A beautiful, transparent conversation about how not to get in trouble. My grandfather would, don't do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so that statement was that. There was no compassion and understanding and guidance. That statement was it. Stay away from boys. And that's how they said it.
And as we found out in Chapter 2, that was not the case.
My mother was hard-headed. She hooked up, and she was 18. She found a guy she liked, and they hooked up. And, he wore protection, right? He wore a condom, right? So she didn't do anything wrong. It's just that, I'm resilient.
So something I was curious about while reading this is, how did you get your mom's story?
I asked her. I said, hey, Mom, can you be interviewed for my book? And she said, yeah. So I work with 2 book consultants that I hired, Hadley and Pasella and Corey Hott. And we met over at the Pendry. And they recorded a conversation with my mom. I called her up. I said, hey, Mom, you're being recorded for my book. We need to know some information. I need the backstory. And she gave it to us. Yeah.
And
it's weird to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? But we had purpose, right? It was for a bigger goal, right? To finish this book. And I just didn't have that information.
So, your mother's character, I think I love, and I'm sure everyone else did that kind of read through it. Nobody was going to make her do something she didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of set that as like the definition of your mother.
Yeah, my mother has always been a rock in my life. The fact that I had a stepfather that did not step up is it's very sad. Not sad to me, but sad in general, because a man should step up if he's going to take the place of another man, just like a stepwoman or stepmother as a woman should step up if she's going to take the place of the mother, right? A parent should step up if it's a step parent. Now, it's not their role. It's not their job, but it kind of is. You know what I mean? So my stepfather never, ever walked me down the street, told me about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He never, not once, told me, hey, I'm proud of you. I love you. Hey, let's go to a movie. Let's get a catch. None of that stuff, My father, my biological father, call him father number 2, he didn't do any of that either, right? So I'm essentially a product of the strong women in my life, and my mother was one of the two. My grandmother was the other one. So yes, my mother is, a strong character, a good person.
She's got a line in here that I'd love you to reflect on for us. When her boss says, "Why didn't you tell us you were pregnant?" Her boss, a white man in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and her response is, "I didn't think it was any of your business."
Mm-hmm.
Reflect on that for me.
My mother passed the nursing exam, and she wanted to be a nurse, but my family could not financially support that dream of hers, right? I often wonder if they had student loans back then, right? I'm like, well, why didn't my mom just, continue? Why didn't she pay for it herself? But I don't imagine they did. I think, part of the American dream is being able to tap into the resources through quality employment. And through quality employment, you're able to save and buy a home. And back then, a large majority of people in this country would buy a home, pay for that home over time, building equity in their home, tap into that equity, pay for college for their kids. My grandparents did not have that. And even if they had a home, but there wasn't that much equity in the home. And I doubt that they had the knowledge to tap into the equity to pay for one of their 14 kids' education. So,
Did you say 14?
14.
That's not in the book.
That's not in the book.
14?
Yeah, 14. It might be in a book. I forget. It might be in a...
Well, I
don't
it's
know
not
if
in chapter 3.
But, damn, if it's not in a book, I should have put it in a book. But, they had a lot of mouths to feed, and they couldn't do that for everyone. There's only so much equity in a home if they had that knowledge. So my mom took it upon herself to apply for a job down at Bell Telephone. And so she did get the job as a telephone operator, and she was good at her job. Everyone has always said that, even when I was a little kid. Your mom's the best, your mom's,
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me a sense of pride. And so when she got the job, she was pregnant with me. And they asked her to step out of line. And when you step out of line, you put your headphones down and you kind of in trouble. And she didn't realize what it could be because she was a stellar employee. And so when they asked her about it, she just basically said the first thing on her mind, which is the same as me. Right? My mother, she wears her heart on her sleeve just like I do. And with her making that comment, she meant it.
But, kind of give us a little, enlighten some of the younger listeners of, what that meant in the 60s.
Oh, man. I mean, it was a defiant moment, right? Right? She really, at that time, you didn't talk back to white men like that, right? Here she is, a person of color, and she's basically saying, it ain't none of your business, so get out of my business. And, it's defiant. It's putting her foot down because she's not going to let anyone talk to her or treat her the way she, didn't want to be treated. So it was still, in this country in the 60s, it was still, very difficult to, speak your mind, right? If you were a person of color or a black person. And she just wasn't having that shit.
What are your thoughts on Chester Tuggle?
My pop-pop?
Mm-hmm.
Love my pop-pop. He, one of those memories that are etched in my brain is of him, right? Showing me the love that, he showed me more love in my early age than my father, my biological father did, or my stepfather did, right? So when I was a little kid, he used to put me up in his Chevy truck. Now, it was a blue truck, right? Rust, drive me around. At the time, he had a bunch of little crops behind, some of the corporate buildings, right? Commercial buildings in Norristown. And he'd take some baskets and go harvest those crops. And I'd be with him. And then he'd take me down to the river, hold my hand, make sure I was safe, walk me down to the river where I watched him fish. And he was a hell of a fisherman. Caught that catfish, man, in Schuylkill River, And we'd bring it back to my mom, right? And right before we walk into the house, he'd hand it to me. And sometimes I'd be dragging it on the floor because of the weight of it and acting like I caught it. And my mom, oh, you brought me some fish, baby. And I'd feel proud that I was, part of something great. My grandparents were amazing, man. My mom, she can make one hell of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, man.
And we're gonna go to her in a minute, but I find it interesting that the way you wrote this, our first impression of Chester Tuggle is
right
of that overbearing father type, and then you reveal your love for your pop-up. So he starts as Chester and becomes pop-up in a couple of paragraphs.
Chester to my mom and her siblings, grandpop, pop-up to me.
Right.
So totally different dynamic, right? I wanted to introduce him as my mother's father from the South, right? But then I get into a more personal relationship with him as my grandfather, right? So totally different dynamic.
Yeah, and that is something a lot of people can identify with. Of you're the grandparent to grandbaby relationship is much different than grandparent to parent.
Absolutely.
And you benefited from that because we get something that just warmed my heart when I read it is you start to talk about mom, and pop. And it's quickly revealed that you have a very special relationship with both of them.
Had. Yes.
They've passed?
Yes.
Is that in the book?
Yes.
So I haven't got there yet.
You haven't gotten.
Oh, so now I'm destroyed.
Yay.
But with that, you have a couple of lines in here about them. You say, Pop never let you down, and you'll never forget Mom and Grandma. Why are they so significant in your life?
Because they were the three people in my life who showed me love, pure love from an early age. My mother and my grandparents, my mom and papa.
It's heartwarming, this part. This is great because you're revealing this really interesting childhood in that home with those people. It seems much, much different than not around those people and outside that home.
Yeah.
You also bring up the scar for the first time here.
The scar in the middle of my eyes?
Yeah.
On my forehead?
Yep.
Yeah.
And you were told.
Yeah.
You were told not to run.
No. Oh, the other scar.
The other scar. Yes.
Yeah, my mom, she used to tell me all the time, I was so fast, though. I was so fast, man. And I used to run through my grandmom's living room, right into the dining room, get to the kitchen where she was, take a look at her, peek at her, turn around and run again. She would say, baby, stop running. You're going to hit your head on that coffee table. How did she know? That's crazy. How does she know that one day I tripped and fell and hit my head on that coffee table? I got rushed to the hospital. Concussion at 2 years old. Stitched me up.
What I love about this is you write that the significance of the scar, it wasn't to instill, I should always listen to what my grandmother says. It wasn't to instill, I should fear things. It says it reinforced your passion for living. What do you mean by that?
Through every traumatic experience, you either come out of it with something, or you fold, right? And you go into a solemn, sort of quiet place. That's not me, right? Especially now that I have the tools of therapy, right? I am able to live through an experience and reflect on it, right? How can I use this to my advantage, right? What can I do to make sure that, this particular instance, isn't a negative in my life, right? How can I use it as a positive in my life? And I have learned how to move forward, right? I don't stay stuck for too long. I'm only human, so yeah, I get stuck. But I always ask myself a question: what now? Right? What now? I live a pretty good life, right? I've traveled well, I've eaten well, I've done some cool stuff. And when I'm alone, I reflect. And the one question I constantly ask myself is, what now? And damn sure I asked myself that question way back when I was knocking on the back of restaurants begging for food. What now? Can't get no worse than this, crying yourself to sleep. Starving. It's one of the worst feelings I've ever felt in my life. But then I realized, oh my God, I can't cry right now. Because if I cry, I'm going to exert energy. And if I exert energy, it's going to make me more hungry. So I got to stop crying. So that particular instance made me sort of suppress my feelings. I was just another caked on layer, of repressing feelings and emotions. And so I'm thankful that now I can go through the cycle of emotions, and I can get to a point where I can have a self-realization, right? That I don't want to be here. I know how to fix it. I got to do this. So I keep asking myself questions. And again, one of those questions is, what now?
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. There's a statement you say about the size of the white lady's house.
Yeah. It's not that much bigger than my grandma's house. But the fact that my grandmother went there and worked there for the nice white lady, right, who used to give me candy, right? My grandmother was awesome. I loved her very much. And to see her, to be able to stop by her place of employment, because she cleaned that lady's house. And, it seemed so much bigger. It was like half a block down the street, but it seemed so much bigger because in the book I say maybe it's because, the lady that, cleaned her house also cleaned our house, So maybe in my mind, that made the house bigger. I don't know.
It was just, it's really interesting because it's something that you can get behind, like with your imagination. Mm-hmm. And very clearly in this book, you have an active imagination, and it informs a lot of who you will become. Mm-hmm. But it was just such an interesting thing to hear of, like, in your head, you had created this narrative.
Sure.
So I do want to give you a chance to talk about Mom's cooking.
Right?
Yep.
In the black community, in the black household, yeah. That's what you'll hear, man. You should come over, man.
Yeah.
Meet. There was nothing like it. I'll get to that in a second, but I vividly recall being in the kitchen, and it wasn't a nice kitchen. It was just a kitchen, and it needed work. But my pop would bring in a whole pig and cut up that pig. We'd make sausage, using the membrane and, grinder and all. I remember that as a kid, and being part of, supplying food for our family. One thing that my grandparents always did, they tried to do is feed other people, and you ask anybody, any of the older people in our family, they'll tell you. And my mom and pop, beautiful people, man. Beautiful people. They will always, you could be Joe Blow from wherever. I think when we were kids, we used to say Joe Blow from Idaho, right?
Yeah.
But you could be from Hawaii. You walking down the street and you're hungry, my grandparents would feed you. You know what I'm saying? And I think all of their kids, all 14 of them, took that with them out into the world. So my family was a giving family, a loving family. And they get that from, my grandparents. But again, that was their parents. So they were treated differently. So some of them might be like, well, Pop was tough on me, right? Something like that. But for me to witness my grandparents give back to the community would maybe subconsciously lead me in a way of giving back to the community, which in my book, you'll see that I've done that. But no, the cooking, my grandma would cook up a storm. My favorite thing that she would do is bake a peanut butter cake. It's my favorite. It was, there was nothing like it. It was pure heaven. So, yeah, she could cook, but she could also bake.
So, towards the end of this chapter, we have the return of Hampton Coleman Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the book, it kind of details things, but there's a specific line in there where when you asked your mom about it, she had forgotten about a hearing.
Yeah, the child support hearing.
How is that not the biggest deal in the world?
I can't even, that when she told me that, I was like, what the, how do you, man, huh?
Are you upset at all? Is it just it's something that happened?
It's water under the bridge now.
Yeah.
But when she told me that, I immediately had emotions towards it. Yeah. Because my childhood was a childhood of being a have-not. Right.
Which is a wild juxtaposition that you're doing because there's so much love in this chapter.
Right.
And then you have this other side too.
Yeah. It's not easy being born and raised with not much. The good thing is you don't realize you don't have much because that's your way of life. But as you get older, it's a clear depiction, right, between the haves and the have-nots, because you go outside of your community, you go into middle school and high school, and you're seeing these kids. Why do they have a car? Why do they have brand new sneakers on? Why do they have nice clothes? And then it hits you. You know, their parents got money, more money than you have because you ain't got shit.
What's really interesting about this is in this chapter, the whole first half is really positive, is really about a child having a wonderful relationship with his grandparents and with his mother.
Well, I tried to balance it out and not specifically be positive or negative. It's my truth, and how that comes across through expression is really what I wanted to. I wanted to paint a story, right? A story of reality through my eyes. And so if you perceive it to be, uplifting, that's awesome. But someone else may read it and be like, oh, that's heavy. And someone else may read it and be like, oh, that's interesting, right? So perspective is pretty awesome. It's subjective, just like art, right? And that's what this is. It's a work of art, I believe.
But let's also be clear that it did really happen, everything in here.
Everything, 100%. From my recollection and my my lenses, right, through my eyes. So in the book, in the beginning, I say that some of these instances may be, different from someone else's eyes who was, who were there and they experienced what I experienced. They may see it as something different, but this is how I see it. You know what I mean? So, one of my friends could be standing right next to me in one of these stories that I say, and I experienced this way, and he may have experienced it the same thing, a completely different way. So if you call him, he may be like, nah, well, this, that, and the third.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the way you write is just excellent, because it is classic storytelling, and there's drips of things, and that led me, as I'm reading, to write down some questions that I had that you would go on to answer. But the first question that I had here, because there's all of these great names. Chester Tuggle is a solid name. Yeah. I love that name. But Tuggle, Coleman, Bazemore. Mm-hmm. And so what this led me to say is, I jotted down, are you a Tuggle, a Coleman, or a Bazemore?
All the above. My stepfather's name was Bazemore. That is my name. That is my name. My birth certificate says it, right? My mother's a Tuggle, and my father, Hampton Coleman II, right? Mm-hmm. He's a Coleman. But my DNA is within him. So I'm all of them.
And did I misread this? Was your name changed?
My name was changed.
It was changed.
Back then, you could do that. Yeah. So I was born Leonard Arnett Tuggle. Right? Leonard. I always thought that I was named after an old Jewish man in the neighborhood. I lived that truth for so long, and I said, Mom, who was I named after? She goes, baby, you were named after my brother Lenton. She's a twin. Her brother Lenton, right? Mm-hmm. She didn't want to name me after Lenton, in case Lenton, my uncle, had a son and wanted to name him Lenton Jr., which he did. So she said, well, I'm going to name him Leonard. But I'm literally named after my uncle, just a different variation of the name.
That's why you listen to the companion piece.
How you doing?
That's why you listen to the companion piece. Now, I'm going to read you a quote here, and I want you to reflect on this, and then we'll close out chapter 3. And what Hampton left me with for a father, J.B., was nothing more than a cowardly slap in the face to a 2-year-old with a scar between his eyes.
I say
heavy.
I say that because in my mind, my reality is JB did not want Hampton around. See, Hampton got out of the Air Force and came and said, what's up? I hear I have a son. And my mother and JB were married at that point, and so they were like, hey, don't come around. This is our family. So JB was adamant. He was like, this is my family. This is 1969. Different time back then. You tell a man, don't come around my family, there could be some violence there, right? It was hard for me to hear my mom tell me that because of my experience. JB was the one who did not want Hampton to come around. So my mom went to Hampton and said, JB don't want you to come around. This is our family. Leave us alone. Hampton said, okay. He didn't fight for me. He didn't come around. He basically didn't pay any child support. And so if you don't pay child support for a kid that you made, that means that your paycheck is more whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And my mom had that hearing that you spoke on. She forgot. How convenient that my father, my biological father, was able to keep all of that money and save all of that money and then bought a really nice house down in Delaware.
I never thought of that.
You know what I mean?
I never thought of that.
Yeah, man.
Wow. That's a whole other
18 years of no child support.
Because, as she puts it, she must have just slipped through the cracks because she was so busy.
As she puts it.
As she puts it.
I could have used that money, man. I had sneakers, for Adidas.
Oh, we'll get there. That's going to do it for chapter 3. We really hope you guys are enjoying this companion piece.
Resilient.
That's right.
Saving the American dream.
And we'll see you after chapter 4.
Later.